I was listening to a Jewish history podcast, one that I follow and listen to fairly regularly now. I wouldn't say every single one of his broadcasts, but this one was titled "Who was the most influential rabbi in the post-war era?" And that kind of fascinated me. It was maybe a month ago, 3 weeks ago. And I was very interested in finding out whether this fellow, who's not a Chabad Chassid, not a Lubavitcher, would actually reach the same conclusion that I would, and that not necessarily because I am a follower of the Rebbe, but just because I kind of studied his teachings, have looked at his influence throughout the world, particularly, in the last 70, 80 years. And I would immediately say that he was the man with the most profound influence on the most Jews in the world because his influence stretched beyond just his Hasidim, but they actually had a vision that encompassed world Jewry and beyond, where every person in the world had to fulfill what was their mission. And I'm pleased to share that the rabbi the historian who does this podcast, actually concurred and actually, because it was kind of a debate and discussion with other people weighing in, although it's his podcast, and he stood his ground and was not prepared to be swayed by any other uh, influences, for lack of a better word, in recent Jewish history, and maintained over and over that it was definitely Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I tell this story tonight on the Rebbe's Yahrzeit, 1994, 3rd of Tammuz, which is the date of tonight, tomorrow. The Rebbe left us, in a physical sense, left this world. And it's a time to reflect. We're told that when a tzaddik leaves this world, he there's an influence that remains on this world, and on a yahrzeit that is even stronger and more powerful. So it's a time to connect, and to look at his legacy, to look at his teachings, and to look at the way he actually influenced the world in the way he did. So when did this all begin? When did this all begin? Can I find this here? Yes. Um, Here we are. But that's not what I want. I want the full screen. I'm not sure you're getting that. Um, okay. Um, so I hope you are getting the full screen. So the Rebbe formally took on the leadership of Chabad, of the Lubavitch movement, on the first yahrzeit of his predecessor. His predecessor, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was um, the 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 um, my namesake, or not my namesake. I was named after him. I'm born a couple of decades later, or not even. And he was his successor and son-in-law. Reluctant for the first year to assume this leadership, but eventually, he did, accepted it, and took on the leadership of Chabad. And this was on a gathering, what they call Fabrengen, what we call Fabrengen, on the 10th of Shvat of the year 5711. That's the year 2051. And there you can see the Hasidim gathered. The crowd was much smaller. The shul was much smaller than it is now. And they gathered around a small table. And the Rebbe, was, sharing with his Hasidim his vision. Um, and I know I've never seen him in the pictures, but he was a young man then. But my father was present at that particular gathering because he was a student at the yeshiva in New York in 770. And so he was present at that gathering. And so he was with the Rebbe from kind of day one. What I want to do is share with you um, a, a, um, a clip. I think it's here. Let's see if I can get this right. Um, a short recording of excerpts of that gathering, because you can hear It's subtitled, and you can hear the Rebbe actually, I think it's this one here. You can hear the Rebbe taking on the formally assuming the leadership by delivering what's called a maimer, or a Hasidic discourse. Deep teachings of Kabbalah kind of brought down into Hasidus, but I mean, I run ahead of myself, and let me just try and share this clip with you if it works. Does it work? No, it does not work. So stop that, and let's do this. Sorry for the technical glitches here. And let's try this. Yeah. Um, Nearly there. Okay. Let's try here. And there's got to be a way of making this play. No. Would be great. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Boss ilegane a heise Carlo Dr. Avdruse med de Shraba Fanor as legane in Ksifkan. Aber der sich legane ligni. Das ist le moki Roy Matschula. Waren ich Kino iso betaktenim heute. Was meint betaktenim bringt das weiter auf dem Waschen Hamedre, ich habe das nicht in der Seele. Der Mensch am Hase und was was geboren Hagashmi. Der bringt weiter auf dem Medre, als ich es in betaktenim heute. Islam ist die Gewinn der Fertig Tada, sie sagt der Demo, die was mir mit alle gewinn die Spinne und Ore zu Orakia. Der noch sagt, der Islam ist angekommen, sein Sadiqi und haben Krieg Mamschir gewinn. Die Spinne auf Orakia sein wollen, als weiter und der Rebbe macht das von Beschitter. Islam ist gekommen, Mesher Rabbeinu, was Kola schwierig Vivi, und hat Mamschir gewinn, die Spinne vor der Kirche, alle Flore. Die Kinder in dem Beschrieb, als Chorcha vielleicht noch sich mit schönen Käse und fühlten sich mit 10 Millionen und schreit nie an die Humani, reißt auf der Ruf. Doch nicht nach dem Bau, da du mich Rebbe Pschirota. Bis zu der Schrieb, und dem, und Vater, Ruf hatten die Registraten die ganze Welt, als darf ich nicht wissen, wie das Frieden, was ich wissen, was für mich geworden. Der Demokratie lässt sich von Namen einzählen und dann sein Schädlich in der Linie von Mamschir sein. Im Schild an der Masse, aber das Beilam Hase, Hagashmi, Rachumri. Bald aber das ist nicht schon durchgegangen, in Wichtel, den Adolf kommen, ja mit Bonn. Na, das was sich jeder von uns, das mit einem alle voll Aschwili, und mir das alles die Schwili, den Himmel, wir haben der Bagola die da, nur der Maxima soll stochen, sollen wir alle sind gesagt. Das ist ja nicht mehr reden. Das ist nicht von Kohlestad auf mir Adaschen. Bringen nach zu der Gymnasium und den Herr der
Okay, I hope that worked. If anybody can give me a thumbs up or down to show me whether they were able to see the video or not, but I hope you heard the sound. I'm not quite sure. in his kind of acceptance speech, the Rebbe quotes a famous um, medrash. And the medrash actually describes the history of the first 14 generations in the world. You know, things went pretty wrong. This world, the Medrash says, is God's garden. It's God's residence. He was here. At first, he created the world, and it describes the Shekhinah, the presence of God, kind of walking around the Garden of Eden. But then things happened that made Hashem rather unwelcome in this world. And seven successive, very grievous sins uh, took place that kind of chased Hashem away from the earth up to seventh heaven, way above there. It started with the golden calf. Sorry, ended with the golden calf. It started with the. It started with the. It started with the eating of the fruit, the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, and then there was Cain and Abel, and many the generation of the flood. There was the Tower of Babel, and so it carries on with seven successive generations that are kind of, for lack of a better word, making God feel quite unwelcome in the world. And so the Shekhinah removes itself from earth to first heaven to second heaven. Eventually, it's in the seventh heaven. And then there are seven great Jewish leaders. Well, they weren't all Jewish, to be honest. Judaism didn't exist yet, but seven great leaders of our people who reversed the process. Started with Abraham, who recognized God. And so he brings God down from first to seventh, or from seventh to sixth, and then there's Isaac and there's Jacob. And this carries on all the way down. If you count seven generations, you end up with Moses being the seventh. And Moses actually brought the Torah into this world on Mount Sinai. So he reversed the process. And he was able to kind of, as a seventh leader, bring God down back to the world as it was. And Moses' accomplishment, building a Mishkan, which is a home for Hashem. So that's what it is. And the Rebbe in this acceptance speech makes a great deal of the fact that, well, subsequent to that, of course, we ended up with the Shekhinah in exile again. And that seven generations of Hasidic leaders then did the job of bringing God back to this world, which he refers to as God's garden, God's original residence, God's original garden, where he kind of frolicked and felt very at home. And when you get to generation number seven, because you start with the Baal Tanya, who was the Zama of the Adi, and you go through generations of Chabad leaders, the Rebbe is actually the seventh generation, or seventh leader. And he's kind of alluding to the fact that he was just handed this baby, which is bring God back to the world, bring God home, bring him back to this world. Um, and and uh, and this is where it all began. This is where it all began, as far as the Rebbe dedicating his life's mission to making this world godly, and that's really about bringing Mashiach. And Mashiach's era is upon us, then God is found all over the world, because anything that's antagonistic to God, negative to God, is no longer going to be there as His presence. So basically, it's taking a wilderness and taking it into a garden. It's seeing the potential for this world, and the more and more we look at this world, the more and more we see a wilderness. We see a jungle. We see destruction. We see decay of morals. We see nations having no respect for one another. It takes a visionary to actually see the garden in the jungle, to be able to be the landscaper that says, we cut this, we cut that, we transform this, we water here, and you're going to have a beautiful garden. And the Rebbe had that vision. And he set out on that date, on the 10th of Shvat, he set out to actually start that journey of bringing Mashiach to the world, or shall we say, to to um, bring God back to his garden. Um, but it actually started many years earlier. That was in 1951. The Rebbe was born in 1902. And at one point, he writes a letter about his early years, and he says, ever since I was able to talk and think and, verbalize thoughts, I started to imagine how the world will be with Mashiach. It's not the kind of stuff that little, toddlers or, nursery school kids, spend any time, give any bandwidth to thinking about, to imagining. The Rebbe makes it very clear that this was a pursuit that didn't start when he ascended to the leadership of Chabad, but it was actually a dream of his and a vision of his that he has had ever since he was a young child. So he started to imagine this world. And how did he go about changing this wilderness or the potential for a garden into an actual garden? So there were two kind of main, um, what should I say, devices that he used. The one was emissaries, shluchim. And I share with you here a picture of my grandfather, Michal Lubska. That's my mother's father. And in 1950, so that was even before the Rebbe took on the formal leadership of Chabad, the Rebbe with his family, the tall one, is my mother. Her brother is on the left of the picture. Her little sister, Alea Shalom, my late sister, is on the bottom right of the picture. This was right after the war, and unfortunately, they were in the DP camp, and the hygiene wasn't very good. So my mother's hair had to be cut off because of lice, and so that's why she has this very unfeminine haircut in this picture. And they were sent as emissaries, the Rebbe's first emissaries. He got a letter, February, March 1950, to say that before his passing, the previous Rebbe had suggested that Chabad move across to the African continent and had suggested Rabbi Michal Lipska as an emissary. And was he up to the task? That letter was signed by Rabbi Menachem Mendelschneis, and not yet formally the Rebbe, but already doing some very kind of Rebbe things, even a year before he formally took on that job and that position. That was the beginning of a process. That turned into an army of shluchim, and that's how they conquered the world. Alone, it would have been an impossible task, but with the help of shluchim, and he loved to say, he loved to quote the rabbinic precept of shlucho shel adam kemoto, an emissary, a person who's been delegated to do a task is like the delegator, basically saying to the shluchim, you represent me wherever in the world you are. And it grew and it grew and it grew exponentially. You've probably all seen the iconic picture of the shluchim outside of 770. They gather for an annual conference, and there's thousands of them standing in front of the building, and they need to actually get specialized photography to be able to do that wide angle, wide lens picture. And bear in mind that not every single one of the Rebbe's emissaries is able to come to that kinnos, that convention every single year. So you're only getting a sampling, maybe most, but definitely not all. And that gives us the idea of the scope of the people that have been enlisted specifically to carry out that mission. And then he also created specific focal points for a campaign. And he called them, he liked to use military wording. He called the youth movement Tzivos Hashem, the army of Hashem, and he called the RVs that used to go out to Manhattan to encourage people to put on film, etc., mitzvah tanks, because he saw this as a war against evil, a war against darkness that had to be overcome. And so he created this 10-point mitzvah campaign. I'm going to show you the finished product, but it actually was something that took decades. And little by little, he encouraged his shluchim and all his followers. Everyone who's chassidim, he felt, could help in this task, not only if you were formally given that job. So he would task everyone with this mitzvah campaign, and this is the end result. This is the 10 mitzvahs, and I think they're in chronological order. Starting with, no, I don't think so. Maybe it doesn't matter, but just before a 6-day war, there was a tefillin campaign. And the Rebbe encouraged people to go out and put on tefillin. I think a few years later was the mezuzah campaign to encourage homes to have mezuzah. At the same time, he encouraged people to, get involved in the lighting of Shabbos candles, even if there wasn't Shabbos observance. He felt that was a first stepping stone. He had a favorite story of a young girl who came home and said, "I want to light candles." And mom said, "Well, if you're lighting candles, so am I." And then the following week, they thought, well, if we're lighting candles, really, as long as the candles are burning, we shouldn't have a TV in the house and we should have a Shabbos meal. And how it snowballed into a family that eventually contacted him and said, from this campaign of lighting Shabbos candles, we actually ended up being fully Shabbos observant. So he kind of never said, you got to keep the whole thing, but he encouraged people to light Shabbos candles. Top left is to learning Torah, Limud Torah, the campaign to encourage people to learn Torah. Tzedakah, which became a campaign not just to give charity regularly, but also to make it part of our lives. And therefore to have a pushka, a office, a new kitchen at home, and to pitch in not necessarily large amounts. That's also important that you be charitable and give a lot of money to charity, but that you actually regularly, pop in coins. Nowadays we've got apps on our phones, and so on the welcome screen when I put on my phone in the morning, there's this very beautiful looking pushka. If you want the link, I'll gladly send it to you, and you just put in a couple of cents, and that's the way I can start my day. Bayit Malay Sfarim in the middle here is the campaign to have books in the home, not just to study Torah, but besides it also fill your books with fill your home with holy books. Kashrut was one of the other campaigns, also one of the early ones, because it started as a 6-point mitzvah campaign, grew and grew, and eventually became 10. And then if we carry on, Avat Yisrael, which is love of your fellow, which was really a cornerstone around which the Rebbe built the entire campaign. If you love a fellow, then you care for them, and then you want to share with them what you're absolutely passionate about. A more recent arrival to the 10-point mitzvah campaign was chinuch, or education, encouraging people to have a proper Torah education, and to in that way to be able to grow and influence other, and family purity mikveh, which was one of the also original mitzvah campaigns, this was kind of the building blocks with which he created this, changing the world literally from the world that is alien to God. And Hashem created such a world, but a task that we change it. But He created a world in which you could easily deny the existence of God. Hey, there are some very wise people out there who total atheists. To say they're stupid because they don't recognize God, no, that's wrong. It doesn't mean that they lack intelligence, that they're low level of development. It just means that God created a world where that mistake is possible. And of course, it's misguided and it's wrong, but it's not impossible. God created a world where the presence of Hashem is totally invisible. You got to work, but you got to want to work at developing and bringing out that divine light every time you do a mitzvah, like according to Pushka, or that Shabbos candles, or put a mezuzah when you're home. If you have mezuzahs already, you take them down, you check them to make sure they're still kosher. Every time you put on to film, or you eat kosher, you enhance your observance of kashrut, etc. Each of these 10 mitzvah points, every time that you engage in a positive mitzvah, you bring a divine light into the world. And the more divine light comes into the world, the more darkness it chases away. There's also a dark light in the world. And that dark light lives on the mistakes that we make, the laws that we break, the averas we make, the many sins that we perform, unfortunately. Every time we refrain from performing one of those sins. Every time we restrain ourselves, what we're actually doing is we're blocking that light, because the dark light, the dark forces, they thrive on the mistakes that we make that allow them to kind of leach divine light and exist, because without God, nothing can exist. So that's what we've been doing. We've been doing this ever since Mount Sinai, when God gave us the instructions to go and conquer the world, transform it, and make it divine. And the journey to Mashiach started then. It's really in retrospect, when we look back at the Rebbe's life, we realize that it wasn't haphazard, that there was a plan that he took on. And from the very beginning, he made it clear that's what he was doing, bringing God back into his garden. And one of the things that the Rebbe said in this original discourse is, he says, don't think I'm doing it for you. Don't even dream for a moment that I'm taking over and you can have an easy life. If you want to be one of my Hasidim, the job is yours. I will guide, I will instruct, I will lead, but I will not do it for you. And this was something that the Rebbe encouraged throughout his life. Famously, was Jonathan Sachs, chief rabbi of, late chief rabbi in the UK, who said the Rebbe didn't create followers, he created leaders. He didn't want you just, follow orders blindly and just do. He actually wanted you to take a partnership along with him in leadership, in making changes. And then, as I mentioned, he left us. On the 3rd of Tammuz, we mark the Yotzat today. The Rebbe was gone. Said goodbye. But that does not mean that he left us without a plan. And there was a lot said about, did the Rebbe leave a succession plan? What's going to happen now? There's no successor. There's no successor because the Rebbe was unparalleled. And none of the names that have been suggested by great thinkers of our generation in terms of potential leaders of Chabad, and the great leaders in Chabad and great minds in Chabad, they are. But there's nothing of that caliber. There's nothing that can lead a movement of that magnitude. Did the Rebbe simply say goodbye, wave, and disappear into the night without a plan? In retrospect, we realize how things were set up. How he had clearly given us instructions as to how to guide our lives and how to get inspiration and how to get instruction. And the proof, what I say, is in the pudding. The fact that the movement has grown to the extent that it has, the fact that the army of Shluchim has grown. I mean, I'm kind of a will call myself B-Shliach. Why? Because when I wanted to come to South Africa, I got a mandate from the Rebbe, wrote in, we got a blessing, and we packed our suitcases knowing that we had a clear mandate. I mean, the Hasidim the Shluchim since 1994, who packed their bags and gone to places far more exotic and far less civilized in Johannesburg, South Africa, or Cape Town, where we lived, and that without an express mandate from the Rebbe. So somehow he created a system that works and that grew. And I think the number of shluchim post 1994 may even outweigh the number of people, from the prior years. The movement's grown and thrived beyond anybody's expectations when people, back then, what was it, 1994, 32 years ago, were saying, is Chabad dead? Is it over? Well, far from it. In fact, I come back to that podcaster I was quoting earlier on, when he was defending his position, which I fully endorse, that the Rebbe is one of the greatest, rabbis, influences of the past generation, of the post-war era. Said, but you know why? Because he still influences this world. Because every single day, this world changes. And this world comes closer to Mashiach because of the Rebbe's influence, even though physically he may not have been with us for over 3 decades. So we honor his legacy, but we more than just honor his legacy. We remain faithful to it. And over this next 24 hours, each of us will think of something that we can do to turn this world, this wilderness, closer into the vision of a garden which the Rebbe created for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.